Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Vinita. Hare Krishna, all devotees.
Hare Krishna Mataji, this is Mukund.
Hey, Bol, Mukund, long time. Vinita also a long time. Vinita, after she went to India, has forgotten me also.
Not like that, Mataji. Where will I go without Bhakti Sangha devotees?
Mataji, you went live. Okay.
Yes, Mataji, we are already live.
Let me know when to start. Huh? You can go ahead. I will share my. Can I just share my screen if it's okay?
Yeah, I'll give you co-host. Or she's host. Okay. I think when you're there, I'll give you.
Can you see my presentation, PPT?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of rough.
Okay. Sounds good. So I'll start recording. Vanita, should I start?
Yes, Mataji, please.
So Preeti, do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hare Krishna, all devotees.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are continuing our series on Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam Chapterwise summary that we do every Monday evening at this time. Currently, we are on Canto 2, chapters 5 and 6. 2 chapters will be covered by Her Grace Sukha Sagari Mataji. And Sukha Sagari Mataji needs no introduction. You all know her. Mataji, you can now take over the call. Thank you so much, Mataji.
Thank you, Preeti, for giving me this opportunity. This is a very technical and factual kind of subject matter, and I am not sure I'm qualified to speak on this, but let me just try to speak a few words by the mercy of Guru and Gauranga and all the devotees. So I beg all of your mercy so that I can speak something useful on this topic. It's kind of complex and it's kind of technical too. So yeah, and with that we'll start. So this will be chapter 5 and 6. Please pardon my cough. I still am coughing sometimes. So this is the title of the chapters are Process of Creation and Purusha, the cause of all causes, and Purusha Saktam. The 4th chapter was Process of. That was my bad. Yeah. So this, yeah, the cause of all causes and Purusha Saktam confirmed. So we'll start with the invocation prayers. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. We'll just say a brief recap of what we've seen so far in Canto 2. So in Canto 1, we just saw that it is a, kind of a summary of or a scene setting for Srimad Bhagavatam, and the history of Mahabharata was discussed until the point where Parikshit Maharaj is cursed, to die within 7 days. And so how he actually utilizes this last 7 days of his life is a big teaching to all of us. And so this is what is the context, or this sets the scene for the whole, Srimad Bhagavatam, where so many speakers at different points of time are explaining or giving answers to the questions by Parikshit Maharaj. So in Canto 2, Chapter 1, we saw how, Bhakti Yoga is superior, and the different limbs of Ashtanga Yoga were explained. In Chapter 2, we saw how this concept of Virata Rupa, which we are going to study in Chapter 5 and 6, was briefly touched upon in Chapter 2. And can anybody remind me what was the context of why we went over Virat Rupa in Chapter 2? If somebody is able to recall.
The Dharanashraya for a neophyte devotee we were discussing initially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like how Preeti explained the Dharanashraya, or the conception of who to meditate on. So the some devotees or impersonates, they meditate on the Virata Rupa, form of the Lord. So that time it was briefly introduced, the concept of Virata Rupa. And in Chapter 3, we saw how, there was discussions about demigod worship and pure devotional service. And then Shaunaka and the other sages, they actually are glorifying Sutta Goswami and imploring him to speak and advise them on this matter, on this subject matter of Bhagavatam, or what to do for the general welfare of people. And in Chapter 4, we saw that, there were questions by Parikshit Maharaj as to, like we see here, 2.4.6. I beg to know from you. So Parikshit Maharaj is actually addressing Shukadev Goswami and asking him, I beg to know from you how the personality of Godhead, by his personal energies, creates this phenomenal universes as they are, which are inconceivable even to the great demigods. So at this point, Sutta Goswami is speaking to the sages, and he recounts this conversation that went between Brahma and Narada. So that is on the verse 25, where, Sutta Goswami is actually recounting how Shukadev Goswami explained the creation process to Parikshit Maharaj, wherein Shukadev Goswami actually discusses this conversation between Brahma and Narada. My dear king, Brahma, the firstborn, on being questioned by Narada, exactly apprised him on this subject as it had been directly spoken by the Lord to his own son, who was impregnated with Vedic knowledge from his very birth. So directly spoken by the Lord to his own son. The son is being referred, who is the son being referred to here? Is Lord Brahma. And he is actually, in one sense, he's the firstborn, and he was impregnated with Vedic knowledge from his very birth, because, he, in one sense, is responsible for the creation, right? The Visarga process, the secondary creation is done by Brahma. So this knowledge of how to create and all this, how the combinations and what works are all given to him. The knowledge was given to him by none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is where we left off in Chapter 4. So now we will see how Narada actually is asking his father, is asking Brahma, how this, universe was created. So this is a brief overview of Chapter 2.5. So verses 1 to 16, as we see. they are actually Narada's questions and Brahma's answers. And then 14 to 16, Brahma answers, like Narada poses 6 questions. And in this regard of creation, which we'll see shortly, and Brahma answers each one of them in these next 2 chapters. So we see that some of the answers are given in verses 14 to 16. And then the Jiva versus Vishnu Tattva, the comparison or the description is given. And then another question, Yatha Srishtam, how is this created, this universe created? The question number 3, Rupam Yadrupam Adhishtanam Yat Srishtam. So like that, we will see the questions now. And then, this is 36. And then in the last few verses, the different conceptions of the Virata Rupa are actually discussed in this chapter. So this is wherever possible, I have just copy-pasted pictures from Subodhini, because the descriptions given in Subodhini are slightly different from from the purpose of Srila Prabhupada, because Subodhini is referring to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries also, and it gives more clarity and into what we are studying. So, so wherever you may not be able to see direct references from the purpose of Srila Prabhupada, but rest assured, they've been taken from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries. So in the text 1 of here, we see there are 6 questions Narada Muni is asking about the universe. So he's asking Yad Rupam. So what are the symptoms of the universe? Yad Adhishtanam, what is as shelter? Or who is the caretaker of the universe? So what is the shelter? Yata Srishtam, how is it created? Srishti, how is the process of creation? How does it happen? Yat Samstham, how is it conserved? And conserved is like, how is it maintained? So who maintains it, and what happens at the end of the universe, of the time cycle? Yat Param, what it depends on. So Yat Param is what is greater than this universe. So who in fact controls this universe, or how does this universe get its standing from? Yat Cha, what is it composed of? What are the ingredients of this universe? So in these first few verses, like we saw earlier, 1 to 8, Narada actually glorifies his father. And he says, he tells Brahmaji, O chief among the demigods, O firstborn living entity, I beg to offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Please tell me the transcendental knowledge which specifically directs one to the truth of the individual soul and the super soul. And in the process of this, he asks all these questions to Lord Brahma. He actually glorifies, his father, knowing very well, but still, he says, my dear father, you know everything, and you are the controller of all. Therefore, may all that I have inquired from you be kindly instructed to me, so that I may be able to understand it as your student. So actually in this scenario, we see that Narada Muni is placing his father as the highest, the creator of everything, the controller of everything. So he is, actually putting his father in this high position as though he is the creator of everything. So why would, Narada, such an exalted state, such an exalted sage and such an exalted devotee, try to say such words and say that Brahma is the controller of everything, he's the creator of everything, right? It kind of seems a little off there. But we all know how Narada Muni is actually trying to propagate the glories of the Lord all the time. And so sometimes he poses these kind of questions only to glorify the Lord, to hear more about the glories of the Lord. We also know how, in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, the Lord's intimate friend, actually, is a pure devotee of the Lord. He's a Kevala Bhakta. And still, Arjuna was in a state of bewilderment, and he was asking Krishna, I'm totally confused. I'm totally lost. So please advise me, what I should be doing. I'm like overcome by all these emotions, this material bondage and everything. So he gives so many reasons, right? In the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we saw that, almost the first 30 or 40 verses, they speak of how Arjuna is offering so many different reasons to not fight the war against the Kauravas. So he is actually overcome by compassion and family bonding. So was Arjuna under illusion? It's not right? It's just that the Lord picks some of his favorite devotees, to play some pastimes for him, and also in the process, teach us as to what should we do for our spiritual benefit. So in the same way, Narada Muni is actually asking Brahma, and he's glorifying his dad and telling him that, you are the supreme controller, you are, everything, all in all. And so please impart to me this knowledge of this creation. How does this all happen? And, things like that. So at that time, let's move on. Yeah. So at that time, Brahma actually, he answers Narada Muni, and he says that, you very well know that I'm not the supreme controller, but, the supreme Lord is none other than Lord Krishna himself. And all these creations, all this are actually nothing but the energy of the Supreme Lord, the differentiated energy of the Supreme Lord. So he says that Lord Brahma says that I'm but a subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Unless one is aware of the position of the Supreme Lord, who is beyond me, one is sure to be illusioned by observing my powerful activities. So I only recreate. So Brahma, actually, Lord Brahma, he puts himself in such a subordinate position, and he says that the creation is actually done by the Supreme Lord, and all I'm doing is just showing off. I'm not actually just like, the truth is, like, all the subject matter has been revealed to us by Srila Prabhupada and so many other exalted devotees, and I'm just trying to present it. So like that, Lord Brahma is trying to downplay himself and tell that I did not do anything much. Says Yena Swarochisha Vishwam Rochitam Rochayam Yaham. So he says, I manifest the universe which is already manifested by the self-manifesting Lord, just as the sun and other luminaries reveal what is already revealed. So he says that this is already revealed by our, by the Supreme Lord himself, but I'm just playing this act, of creation, where I'm not doing any of these things. So he gives total credit to actually Krishna for the creation process. And then he also goes on, so what is it? Why do people still think that Brahma is the creator and give him the credit? So he goes on to say that these people are actually influenced by the Maya potency of the Lord. So my obeisance to the Lord, by whose Maya people call me the supreme controller, identifying with the conception of me and mine, mamaham, ignorant persons bewildered by Maya talk nonsense. Even Maya cannot stand, Prabhupada says in that verse. In verse 13, it said that Maya is ashamed of herself. These are the words Prabhupada uses in the translation. She's ashamed of herself to even stand in front of Krishna. So she's actually standing behind Krishna. Like how we know, in the front of Krishna is knowledge, and the back of Krishna is nescience, right? Nescience or ignorance. So when a person, so Maya Devi is so ashamed of herself. So she actually, because people fall into nescience by the influence of Maya, so she actually stands behind the Supreme Lord. Even Maya cannot stand in front of the Lord. She stands behind the Lord, being ashamed of her position of deceiving the people. So now, after giving all this explanation, Brahma wants to establish that he's not the supreme proprietor, or he's not the supreme creator of anything, but it is actually the Lord himself who is creating, maintaining, and doing everything. We'll see more details of this, how is explained. And so the other agents are just, the other demigods are just agents of the Supreme Lord in carrying out his will and his desire. So these are the 6 questions, and we'll move on to some of the answers which are discussed in text 14 and 15 and 16. So text 14, I'll let's read some excerpts from text 14, because it's best if we just read from the verse and the translation. Dravyam karma cha kalascha swabhavo jiva evacha. So dravyam refers to the material ingredients like the Panchabhuta, earth, water, fire, air, sky. Karma is the activities, like the past karma, like that we say, of the jivas. Cha kalascha. Kala is the eternal time. Swabhava is the nature of the jiva. Jiva evacha vasudevat paro brahman na chanyortho asti tatvataha. The 5 elementary ingredients of creation, dravyam, and then the interaction thereupon set up by eternal time, karma, and the intuition or nature of the individual living beings, so swabhavo, are all differentiated parts and parcels of the personality of Godhead Vasudeva, and in truth, there is no other value in them. So I'm reading from 14, verse 14. So in the purport, Prabhupada explains, this phenomenal word is impersonally the representation of Vasudeva, because the ingredients of its creation, their interaction, and the enjoyer of the resultant action, the living being, are all produced by the external and internal energies of Lord Krishna. So the Bhumirapanalo Vayu, that verse from Bhagavad Gita is referred to. So the living entity who enjoys the interaction of the above gross and subtle ingredients as set up by eternal time is an offshoot of internal potency with freedom to remain either in the material world or in the spiritual world. In the material world, the living entity is enticed by deluding nescience, but in the spiritual world, he is in the normal condition of spiritual existence. The living entity is known as the marginal potency of the Lord. So these kind of details about how we also see in Bhagavad Gita, the 5 subject matters are discussed, right? Karma, kala, and so forth. So this is very similar to that. But here we are also seeing that swabhava is also mentioned here. And then, this is the first answer to Yad Rupam, what is actually this material creation? So this is the answer Lord Brahma gives to the first question of Narada, where he says that he talks about all these material ingredients, the karma, kala, swabhava, jiva, etc. And he says that all these are nothing but differentiated parts and parcels, vibhinna amsha, differentiated parts and parcels, vibhinna amsha of the personality of Godhead Vasudeva. So he says, other than their relationship with Vasudeva, rityartam yat pratiyeta, na pratiyeta chatmani. So we've seen that, if anything that is not related to the Supreme Lord, it's actually, there is no value in them, unless they are connected to the Supreme Lord. So this is what is being discussed in verse 14. And then we see in verse 15 and 16, there are 2 answers, given 2 questions to Yad Adhishtanam and Yad Param. So who is the Param means what is this material world dependent on? And Yad Adhishtanam means what is the shelter for this material world? So different Vedic literatures, and let me just go through the 15th. This is a very important key verse. Narayana Paraveda, Deva Narayana Angaja, Narayana Paraloka, Narayana Paramakha. The Vedic literatures are made by and are meant for the Supreme Lord. The demigods are also meant for serving the Lord as parts of his body. The different planets are also meant for the sake of the Lord, and different sacrifices are performed just to please him. So we also see in Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna says, right, Vedescha sarver ahameva vedyo vedanta krit veda videva chaham. So the similar theme is being discussed, that all these literatures, all this the Vedic literatures, the demigods, everything, all that are meant, or is the cause, or is meant for actually worshipping or offering devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'll just read a few kind of excerpts from the purport. Yeah. Any book of knowledge, science, or art must lead to the knowledge of Narayana, otherwise, it must be rejected. That is the way of advancement of knowledge. The supreme worshipable deity is Narayana. The demigods are recommended secondarily for worship in relation to Narayana, because the demigods are assisting hands in the management of the universal affairs. As the officers of a kingdom are respected due to their relation to the king, the demigods are worshipped due to their relation to the Lord. Without the Lord's relation, worship of the demigods is unauthorized, avidhipurvakam, just as it is improper to water the leaves and branch of a tree without watering its root. This is also another famous verse, Bhujango. Therefore, the demigods are also dependent on Narayana. The lokas or different planets are attractive because they have different varieties of life and bliss, partially representing the Satchid Ananda Vigraha. So, this is what is being explained in verses 14, 15, and 16, which gives some idea of Adhishtanam, who is the shelter. So, in this verse, Prabhupada is clearly saying that all these, the lokas, the demigods, this Vedic scriptures, everything, they do not hold any value unless, they are actually meant for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So by themselves, they have no value in them. The different sacrifices, all these are meant just to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but otherwise they don't have any value. So that is the answer to the question, Yad Adhishtanam, or who is the shelter? And then Yat Param, like what is the cause, or what does it depend on? All these things, they actually depend on the Supreme Personality of Godhead for even their basic functioning, right? Without their sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nothing can happen. So this is what is explained. Let's move on to the next theme. So next, in the following verses, actually, there is a little bit more detail about, where Lord Brahma also discusses some details about how the differences between the Jiva Tattva and the Vishnu Tattva, because how he is describing, we saw in 14 and 15, that 14, 15 and 16, how the Supreme Lord is the shelter. He is the Yad Adhishtanam and Yad Param. So all the creations of the Supreme Lord are in fact dependent on the Supreme Lord. So he goes on, Brahma goes on to say that I'm also created by him, and I only create what has already been created by him under his supervision, ikshaya, and inspiration, abhichoditaha. So the Lord is the one who is actually inspiring Brahma. We will see later on how, they offered, the demigods and Brahma offer prayers to the Lord, and then how the Lord actually kicks off, or, jumpstarts this process of secondary creation. The transcendental Lord accepts the three gunas through his Maya Shakti just for the sake of creation, maintenance, and destruction. These gunas bind the jiva. The gunas further manifest as matter, knowledge, and activities, dravya, jnana, and kriya, putting the conditioned jiva under bondage. The jiva cannot see the Lord due to being covered by these gunas. So Yogamaya Samavrita. So he's actually the, the Lord cannot be seen, Maya Javanika Channam. We see so many prayers like that, right? Where, Kunti Mataji is also telling that remove this curtain, so that we can see the Lord. So the living entities who are in the mode of ignorance or passion or mundane goodness, they are actually covered by this curtain of Maya, so they cannot actually see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here Brahma is trying to emphasize the point that only a pure devotee of the Lord can actually know the Supreme Personality of Godhead, at least to some extent. No person, later on we'll see where Brahma says, no person can know the Lord in entirety. And a very nice discussion goes on in the later few verses where we can go into details of how that is, how Lord Brahma actually justifies those things, like how nobody can know, and even the Supreme Lord cannot himself sometimes know. So that's what is discussed later. But now we'll see his answers to Yet Srishtam. So Srishtam means, Srishti means creation. So how is this phenomenal world created, or this material world or universe is created? So there are two parts to this creation. One is Karya Srishti, and then the other one is Kriya Srishti. Karana Srishti and Karya Srishti. I think I got the names wrong. Okay, you can see my, yeah, so this is Karana Srishti. So briefly, before we start into, we look into this Srishti and other things, we'll try to understand from here, there'll be some references to actually the Purusha Sukta prayers. So though the next chapter, chapter 6, is actually titled as Purusha Sukta, but we'll see in the following verses also, starting somewhere around here, 35, like that, that these verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam here are not different from the Purusha Sukta prayers. So in one sense, the Purusha Sukta prayers are actually starting right here, in this chapter 5, towards the end of the chapter 5 itself, where the different, Sahasra Shirsha, Purusha, all those things will be discussed. So before that, actually, we are looking into this topic of the Shrishti, or Yata Shrishtam, the creation of the universe, which was asked by Narada Muni. So in this, two types of Shrishti is discussed, like I said, Karana Shrishti and Karya Shrishti. So this Karana Shrishti is nothing but, in one sense, you can say the assembly or the creation of the basic elements or the basic ingredients, which are needed for the creation of the universe. So we see here the Karana Dakshaya Vishnu in this chart. This picture is actually taken from the Subodhini. So the Karno Dakshayi Vishnu, he's lying on the causal ocean, and his glance impregnates Jiva into material nature. So in the verse, we see that Kala and Jivas are impregnated into the material nature, which is in an undifferentiated form. So undifferentiated, where, it's in a dormant state, nothing, there is no differentiation of the material elements, like there are no gunas, there is no, the ingredients like bhumi, rapo, nalo, vayu, or so many things. So none of these differentiations are there in the pradhana. It's just in like a dormant state where nothing is just amassed like that. So when Karno Dakshayi Vishnu, he casts his glance, and we also see from Brahma Samhita, right? This glance is none other than Shambhu. So we also see that, the Supreme Lord, he, though he is actually, the creator, the maintainer, and the destroyer of the material universe, but he's never in actual touch with this material process of creation or with this material. So he has different agents who actually do is like the glance of the Supreme Lord, which actually transmits, which impregnates the pradhana with the kala and the jivas. So the jivas, the karma and svabhava together are called the jiva, okay, here in this context. So these are actually impregnated by, the glance of the Supreme Lord, and that glance is actually Shambhu. which we see in Brahma Samhita. So the Lord never actually gets involved in any of these, but he has agents doing all these for him, like Maya does so many things for him. And we'll see how other demigods and Brahma and all help him in this process of creation. So what happens is when the Lord impregnates this pradhana, which is an undifferentiated form of the material universe, it actually, this dormant state of this pradhana, it actually gets differentiated, so the different gunas are thereby formed because of this kind of impregnation with Kala and Jiva. So this Mahatattva is transformed from the pradhana, and there is now differentiation in the Mahatattva. So we'll see what happens after that. In the chart is very clear. I hope you can see. I don't know if the picture is too clear. So this Mahatattva, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that this Mahatattva actually is predominantly in Sattva and Rajas. So we can see here on the chart, Mahatattva in Sattva is called Mahatattva, and in Rajas it's called Sutra Tattva. But both these are commonly referred to as Mahatattva in our purports. Okay, but Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he further defines or differentiates these two. So the Mahatattva is predominantly in Sattva and Rajas. So the Sattva portion of Mahatattva is called Mahatattva, and the Mahatattva in Rajas, or in the mode of passion, is called Sutra Tattva. But in our purposes, in our purports, it's commonly referred to as Mahatattva. So though predominantly it is in Sattva and Rajas, it's not, we should understand that there is some portion of tamas also there. So mode of goodness, mode of passion, and tamas is also there. But though it is predominantly in Sattva and Rajas, goodness and passion, there is some portion of ignorance, mode of ignorance there. And from that portion of mode of ignorance, ahankara comes. That is the false ego. The ego comes. So this ahankara, again, though we say it is predominantly in tamas, like from the ignorance, the Mahatattva in tamas actually gives rise to ahankara. Even though it's predominantly in tamas, there are some portions of goodness and passion in them too. So we have to understand this keyword predominant. Okay, so that doesn't mean that they're devoid of the other gunas, but the other gunas are in minute quantities present there. So this ahankara in goodness is gives rise to the jnana shakti, and then the ahankara in passion gives rise to the kriya shakti, and then the ignorance, the ahankara and ignorance gives rise to the dravya shakti. So that is like the all the material ingredients. So we see how, so ahankara and goodness, it gives rise to mind and 10 senses, 10 sense devatas, and the ahankara and passion, it gives rise to prana, 10 senses and intelligence, and ahankara and ignorance gives rise to 5 tanmatras and 5 elements. So here more details are given in this chart below of what are these senses we are discussing, and the devatas for each of these senses, and how each of these tanmatras and 5 elements are actually connected to each other or related to each other. So we know that the first manifestation of the tanmatra was sound, and sound is actually ether. It comes from ether, and from ether, when you add the sense of touch, you get air, and from air, when you add the sense of form, you get fire, and from fire, when taste is added, you get water. From water, when smell is added, you get earth. So this is the progression as we see in the chart of the different elements, and also the gross elements, and also the sense objects. So this is described in this Karana Shrishti. So these basic ingredients, the 10 senses, the mind, prana, tan, matras, all these are created in the Karana Shrishti. We'll move on to, okay, it's 8 already. We'll move on to Kriya Shrishti. So this Kriya Shrishti is nothing but, in one sense, the actual assembly of these raw materials, which we saw earlier, all these different senses, sense objects, all those that are created. So how that Kriya Shrishti happens is when Garbhodakashayi, he enters into each of the universes, that's when the secondary creation, actually happens. So the chart on the right also describes the 23 elements, Mahatattva, blah, blah, all these things. And then the assembly happens by laws, Maya Shakti. So before Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he enters each of these universes. These universes are lying dormant, in the ocean for thousands of years. So, and after thousands of years, these demigods and Lord Brahma, they offer these prayers, and then only then Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he enters the universe and he enlivens it. He then expands into the Virat Rupa, which we will see in the next chapter, the discussion of the Virat Rupa. So towards the end of the chapter, because we touched upon, Virata Rupa, there are different descriptions of the Virata Rupa which is given. So this Virata Rupa is described as nothing but an imagination for philosophers who like to imagine the universe to be different limbs of the Lord. So they like to meditate on the Lord in this form. So there are three different descriptions of the Virata Rupa. One is in terms of the planetary systems. So in this, we can see from the chart that the Satya Loka or the Brahma Loka, which is another name for the Satya Loka, is the head of the Lord. Tapa Loka is the breast or the lips. Jana Loka is the neck. Mahar Loka, chest. So on and so forth. And we see Patala as the soles of the feet. So this is one imagination by one group of philosophers who would like to consider this Virat Rupa to be this kind of manifestation of the universe. So in terms, another description of the Virata Rupa is in terms of Varnas. So in Varna is like, Chatur Varnya, Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. So Brahmanas are considered the mouth and head. Kshatriyas are considered the arms, Vaishyas, the thighs, Shudras, the legs. So the philosophers, they actually try to explain the Supreme Personality of Godhead by these kind of imaginary, comparison of the different limbs of the Lord to different things. And then there's another imagination, which we see in verse 42, which actually these kind of philosophers, they tend to imagine the legs of the Lord to be Bhurloka, and then the Bhuvarloka, the middle planetary system is navel, and then the Swarloka or Swargaloka, the upper planetary system, is chest to head. So it's said that these, the last kind of imagination is actually done by people who don't have a concept of, the universe beyond the Swargaloka. So they feel that the universe just consists of Bhur, Bhuvar, and Swarga, and there is nothing beyond it. So they don't have a conception of anything beyond Swargaloka. So those kind of philosophers or those kind of people, they tend to imagine the Virata Rupa of the Lord as we just saw now. So Bhur, Bhuvar, and Swarloka, showing the different limbs of the Lord like that. So, but this is for people who have a very, very limited conception. Okay, now I think we will move on to chapter 6. So like I said earlier, in chapter 5 itself, there were references to the Purusha Sukha prayers. Let me try to grab those verses, where verse number 35. You see, Sa eva purushastasmad andam nirbhidya nirgatah sahasrorvangri bahvaksha sahasranana shishavan. The Lord Mahavishnu, although lying in the causal ocean, came out of it and dividing himself as Hiranyagarbha, he entered into each universe and assumed the Virata Rupa with thousands of legs, arms, mouth, head, etc. So this is actually where, the first prayer, like we know, of Purusha Sukta. This Purusha Sukta prayers, it's basically recited by all kinds of people, Vaishnavas or even non-Vaishnavas, Mayavas or impersonalists, everybody, they believe in this Purusha Sukta prayer because this actually does not give a direct reference to who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, but then it just describes him in different features like that. So we see the first verse, of Purusha Sukta prayer, Sahasra Shesha Purushaha Sahasrakshat Sahasrapad Sabhumim Vishvato Vritva Atyatishta Dashangulam. So all this, that it's a direct reference. So that's why Prabhupada has actually named the chapter 6 as Purusha Sukta confirmed, but is actually starting in chapter 5, towards the end of chapter 5 itself, where this description of the Lord, he entered into the universe and assumed the Virata Rupa with thousands of legs, arms, mouths, head, etc. So this is nothing but a confirmation of the Purusha Sukta prayers. So we'll further see how these Purusha Sukta prayers are, confirmed in chapter 6. So like we see, there's a brief overview of this chapter 6. And this is again taken from the Subodhini. So by way of actually describing this Virata Rupa of the Lord, Brahma is answering the other questions of Narada Muni. So we see in verses 1 to 17, Brahma answers Yacha, the material cause and the efficient cause of the universe. And then in verses 18 to 22, we'll see how the material and the spiritual sky are discussed, like how the spiritual sky is 3 times the size of the material sky. And then 23 to through 30, we see that how Brahma actually gives direct evidence, pratyaksha pramana, of how the Lord is the source of all these ingredients. So before we actually delve into this, I just would like to, I don't know if I have a slide for it. Yeah. So in this few verses, which we are going to see in chapter 6 from now on, these concepts will be good to keep in mind. So Lord Brahma says that the Lord is the nimitta, upadana, and the sahakarika karanas. So nimitta is the efficient cause. The example of a potter making a clay pot is given. So nimitta karana, or the efficient cause. So just by having clay, the pot cannot be made. So the efficient cause, or the nimitta karana, is the potter who is actually making the pot. Okay, so the Lord is the nimitta karana. And then upadana. Upadana is the raw materials, clay. So we'll see how the Lord is actually the source of all these raw materials to the Dravya Shakti. Everything comes from the Lord. We will see these. And then Sahakarika. Sahakarika, the accessories. So it is like the potter's wheel, how the different processes, what all it takes to create this clay pot. So all that is Sahakarika. So all these three, are all these three karanas are none other than the Lord himself. So this is what will be explained in the following verses, which we will see now. So the first one, the Lord as the material cause. So these verses where we see how these ingredients, or these basic ingredients, sense objects and things are described, are a little different, from Prabhupada's purports. I'm just sharing this picture I took from the Subodhini, which is in one sense like a formula for how to understand this this early creation, of these sense objects and things like that. So how it happens is the Lord has sense organs, and he has both subtle and gross sense organs. So the Lord's subtle sense organs, they give rise to the sense object, that is tanmatra, and then the element refers to bhumi, rapa, nano, vayu, one of the elements. And then the Lord's gross sense organ, it gives rise to the sense devatas, and then the subtle senses of Virata, Rupa and Jiva. So the explanation Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives here is that the Lord here, which is being referred to, who is the source of all these, tanmatra, these dravyas, these sense devatas, and then the subtle senses of Virat Rupa, this Lord who is the source, or from whom these ingredients are derived, is none other than Garbhodakshai Vishnu. So when Garbhodakshai Vishnu, he enters each of these universes. So at that time, and we'll see proof of this also in the later few verses, okay, why Garbhodakshai Vishnu is the source of this. So at the so when he enters into each of these universes, so the Lord, just as how we have gross and subtle senses, the Lord also has gross and subtle, but they are totally spiritual. We have like material, but the Lord has totally spiritual, subtle, and gross sense organs. So this actually gives rise to the different sense objects of the Virata Rupa and the Jiva. Okay, so that's how it happens. So there's an example given in the Subodhini. The Lord's Jiva gives rise to taste plus water. So taste is the sense object and the element is water, right? So water, taste, right? That's how we associate, we saw earlier. The Lord's Talu, or the tongue, gives rise to Varuna and Jiva of Virata Rupa and Jiva. So the Garbhodakshai Vishnu's Talu, or the tongue, gives rise to the sense devata, which is Varuna, water, and Jihva of Virata Rupa and Jiva. So some explanations of which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives here of these material ingredients may be a little different from what is described there in the purports, but we will just take this as a basis to discuss how the different material ingredient, how the Lord is the source of the different material ingredients. So this is another picture I took from Subodhini, and how these different gross and subtle sense organs give rise to the different devatas or sense objects and elements is actually further described in chapter 210, like 4 chapters ahead. So we'll be seeing this again, but I thought it's a good time to kind of just gloss over how these different material ingredients are created. So when the Lord, he desires to understand himself through Vedic sound, so the gross sense organ is karna, and then the subtle sense organ is shrotra. So from there, the sense devatas, dig devatas, they come forth. And then the sense object is sound, and then the gross element. So we associate sound with ether. So first there was sound, and then ether, okay? And then, so similarly, we see to experience softness, hardness, heat, cold. We know, right? This is like sparsha, right? So tvachi, or the gross sense organ is tvachi, or the skin. And then the subtle sense organ is tvak, or the sense of touch. And then the sense devata is vayu. And then touch and air, the sense object and gross element. And then the Lord, when he desires to see himself and other objects, akshini, the eyes, are come forth. And then a subtle sense organ is chakshu of the Lord. So this gives rise to the sense devata Surya, because in darkness we cannot see. Surya actually illuminates everything, and then we are able to see the different objects. So then from there, so when we are able to see, we see a form, right? So form and fire. Fire has a form. It has the other qualities also, sound and air. Sound and touch. So Similarly, like this, all this, there are 30 descriptions of when the Lord decided to speak, So Mukham, his voice, and subtle sense organ is Vag. So the sense devata is Agni Deva, and the activity is speech. So like this, different descriptions are actually given in this, these verses. Let me try to get the number. Yeah. Yeah, these are given in verses 1 through 17 of the, oh my God, it's time already. Yeah, 1 through 17 of the 6th chapter. We see how these different, how the Lord acts as the material cause, okay, is given in this, in these different verses 1 to 17. I'm not going to too much details, but let's just understand this formula, that the Lord's subtle sense organ gives rise to the sense object and element, and the Lord's gross sense organ gives rise to the devatas, and then the subtle sense of the Virat Rupa and Jiva. So this is something we would want to remember. And moving on, so next, the spiritual and the material worlds are actually described by Lord Brahma. The spiritual world is actually 3 times the material world. Again, this is a confirmation of the Purusha Sukta prayer 3. Etavanasya mahima ato jhayam chagumsha purushaha padosya vishva bhutani tripadasya mritam divi. So this is like the 3rd shloka of the Purusha Sukta prayers, and that is what is being discussed. So that is why Prabhupada has actually, and the Acharyas, they've named this chapter as Purusha Sukta confirmed. So here we see that the spiritual world is actually 3 times the size of the material world, and Dashangulam, we see in the Purusha Sukta prayers, Atyatishta Dashangulam. Sabhumi Vishwato Vritva Atyatishta Dashangulam. So it's not just, so this Garbhodakshai Vishnu is described in the verses when he enters into this universe. So he goes and he also comes out of the universe. It doesn't literally mean that he's coming out of the universe, but all it means is that he is bigger than any size of the universe. So whatever be the size of the universe, Dashangulam, he is like 10 fingers, always bigger than the size of the universe. So that's what it means when, the verse, one of these verses here, it says from 18, it says that he goes beyond this universe, or this anda, he goes beyond it. That only means to say that the Garbhodakshai Vishnu is actually bigger than the size of the universe. So he's not just the Lord of the material world, but is beyond the material world, and also the Lord of the spiritual world, Amrita Abhaya. It is difficult to measure his glories. The material universe is a manifestation of 1/4 of his energy. Above this Ekapada is Tripada, which is characterized by Amritam, Kshemam, and Abhayam. So we know, right? Amritam is eternality, and then, bliss, and then there is no fear. So all these are the symptoms of the spiritual universe. I think I copied another one. There's, yeah. So again, these different qualities of the living entities in the spiritual and the material world are as described here. We see that in Ekapada, like in the material universes, the cycle of birth, it's called Praja, right? Praja means who is going through the cycle of birth and death. So they have this repeated cycle of birth and death. But then in the spiritual world, there is no cycle of birth and death. We know, right? It is eternity. The concept of eternity is there in the spiritual world. And then in Ekapada, or in the material worlds, we see Grahamedis, Abrahad Vratas. So Grahamedis who are attached to like family life, and who are into sense gratification and things like that. But in the spiritual world, they are not actually attached to this kind of Maya or sense gratification. And in Ekapada, or in the material world, the living entities are not inclined, or they do not want to take up to the service of the Lord, they'd rather enjoy themselves. But in the spiritual worlds, the devotees are actually dedicated to serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the nature of the souls, we see in the material world, they want to lord it over the material nature, right? But in the spiritual world, they actually want to become a servant of the Lord. So there, and also these different things, fear, forgetfulness, and what's this? Souls are less in number, innumerable in the spiritual world. Sandhini, manifestation, is 1/4, and this is 3/4. So Satchit Ananda, the last one, it's cut off kind of. So Satchit Ananda is very, very, kind of tiny, like we say, right? The true affection or love can be a glimpse of it, can be seen in the Vatsalya Rasa, or the parental love for a child. But so it's in very, very minute quantities. You can see, all this Satchit Ananda manifest in the material world. It's actually a pervert reflection, but it is full, the spiritual world is full of Satchit and Ananda. Actually, it's a very nice, I don't know, Preeti, is it okay to go a little beyond time?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, because, this is a wonderful purport. I would like to read a few excerpts from purport 20. I hope it's okay.
Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the purport 20, very wonderful, actually purport by Srila Prabhupada. So in this, in the last section, okay, it is described. So we just saw the description of the living entities who actually, Dvavemo Purusho, okay. We also see that, in chapter 15, I think, right? So Ksharashchakshara Evacha. So the fallible, infallible entities, we see in the Bhagavad Gita also, it's mentioned. So in the similar vein, it's explained in 20 also. Prabhupada, the last paragraph, I'm trying to, for want of time, I just will go to the last paragraph. The householders and persons who have deliberately broken the vow of celibacy cannot enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. So this is the qualification. Like in simple sentences, Prabhupada says, who belongs to the spiritual world and who belongs to the material world. The pious householders or the fallen yogis or the fallen transcendentalists can be promoted to the higher planets within the material world, but they will fail to enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. Abrahad Vratas are those who have broken the vow of celibacy. The Vanaprasthas, or those retired from family life, and the sannyasis, or the renounced persons, cannot break the vow of celibacy if they want success in the process. So Vanaprastha, generally Panchashodham, Vanam Vrajet, right? So after 50, it's important, like for how Prabhupada says, at least after 50, we have to strictly follow this vow of celibacy. Of course, of all the 3 ashramas, of all the 4 ashramas, 3 of the ashramas, they actually recommend celibacy, like Brahmachari, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa ashram. The Brahmacharis, Vanaprasthas, and Sannyasis do not intend to take rebirth. Praja, like I was saying earlier, praja means one who is repeated cycle of birth and death. Nor are they meant for secretly indulging in sex life. Such a fall down by the spiritualist may be compensated by another chance for human life in good families. Shuchinam Srimatam Gehe. So, even if we try to secretly indulge in these kind of things, rest assured, you're not going to the spiritual world. So that's why we have so much emphasis, in our scriptures, that why we have to curtail this gross sex desire, because if you have even an iota of it, like how Prabhupada says, you're not entering the spiritual world. Such a fall down by a spiritualist may be compensated by another chance. So even if you have a fall down, you have to take another chance for a human life. And there'll be Shuchinam Srimatam Gehe. In good families of learned Brahmanas, or of rich merchants for another term of elevation. But the best thing is to attain the highest perfection of deathlessness as soon as the human form of life is attained. Otherwise, the whole policy of human life will prove to be a total failure. So in this purport, yeah, this is something I wanted to bring, to all of our attention, because Prabhupada, in very simple words, he gives like who is eligible to be a resident of the spiritual world and who is a resident of the material world. So anybody who has any tinge of, sexual attraction or, sexual tendency, rest assured, staying back in the material world. So this is what Prabhupada is actually telling us in this purport. So I just want to bring that to the fore. Okay, let's move on. So now, Brahma, oops, what happened? Yeah. So Brahma actually gave, the description of how these different material ingredients, how from the subtle and the gross sense organs of the Supreme Lord, of the Garbhodakshai Vishnu, these other counterparts are created for Virata Rupa and the Jiva. So at this time, the question may arise as to why should we trust, Brahma, if he is telling that this is how the creation is taking place, why should we trust? So at this point of time, in verses 23 to 30, Brahma actually says that I am a living proof. I have seen this happen myself. So Brahma, when he was, when he first came, on that lotus flower which sprouted from the navel of Garbhodakshai Vishnu, he was completely lost, and he wanted to perform some sacrifice for the Lord, to appease him. He didn't know what to do. So he didn't have any ingredients for this sacrifice too. He didn't have any kind of, whatever is needed, like different things are mentioned for the as the ingredients of sacrifice. I'm not going into too many details as we're short of time. So animals, like the grass and so many other things which are there's a beautiful purport about that also. And so these things actually Brahma was not aware, and he actually personally collected all these ingredients from the different parts of the Lord's body. So Brahma says that I'm the Pratyaksha Pramana, though we tend to hear that all these ingredients, the Karana Shakti, Dravya Shakti, like the Upadana Karana is actually Upadana comes from the Supreme Lord. Brahma says that I'm the proof. I've actually done it. When I was the firstborn and nothing else existed, I didn't even have the ingredients to offer, sacrifices to the Lord, to worship the Lord. So I personally gathered everything from the Lord's different parts of the body. So he says, I'm the proof that, the Lord is the source of all these things. And then he further, there is this, when you have time, please try to go through these translations of 22 to 30 verse, and then the purport of 23rd verse, okay? Because of time, I'm not reading now. But Brahma, very beautifully, he describes all these things, how he actually got this ingredient. And he also further goes on to prove that why should we even believe Brahma when he says that, I got this ingredients personally, like that. So he goes on to say important concepts are actually discussed, like wherever I say P34, P35, P36, we should technically be reading the purports to understand and how Prabhupada beautifully has described these concepts. But due to, kind of lack of time, I'm not going into much detail. But the essence is that, Brahma says that only a person who is, totally devoted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is actually taken to devotional service, can even understand a little bit of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he says that not because I'm, Brahma, or because of the position of Brahma, you should believe me that I know it. It's only because that, I am engaged in pure devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So as a devotee, you trust my words. So even we see, right, even in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that, Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhaktya pranashyati. So even there, the Supreme Lord Krishna, he actually, as his devotee, the devotee to proclaim that, Aname bhaktya pranashyati, that, the devotee never perishes like that. So, so the Supreme Lord always, these devotees, the pure devotees of the Supreme Lord, they are, a source, a great source of truth, or their words, or their, the philosophy they're preaching should be taken as the absolute truth or gospel truth. That's what um, actually Prabhupada uses this word, gospel truth, which is nothing but a translation of Veda Vakya, like the words of the Veda Vakya. When we say Veda Vakya, we say that this is a truth, right? A gospel truth which cannot be refuted. So this Brahma, what he says, should be considered as gospel truth only because of the qualification that he is a pure devotee of the Lord. So when Brahma, he also, so in one sense, actually, we see that Brahma is praising himself, right? He's saying that I'm the pure devotee of the Lord, so that's why you should believe me when I say that the Supreme Lord is actually the source of all these ingredients and everything. So, but then immediately he takes a humble position, and he says, though I'm a supreme, I offer devotional service to the Lord, I'm very much subordinate to him. Without the Lord, my creation actually holds no meaning. So he takes a very humble position, we see in in verse 35. And then he also says that this this was the interesting part I was talking about, like where Brahma says that, even I, or even the demigods, we do not know the supreme position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, because we don't know him in entirety. And what to speak of us, even the Supreme Lord doesn't know himself in entirety. So what this means is, doesn't mean that the Lord is having any ignorance or anything there. All it means is that, there's always this competition between his omnipotency and omniscience. So the potency, or the vibhuti of the Lord's potencies are ever expanding. So before the Lord comes to know, okay, now this is my vibhuti, this is all my potencies. So this, the knowledge aspect of the Lord, is always trying to play catch up with this potency aspect of the Lord. So the omnipotency, the omniscience nature is actually trying to keep, pace with the omnipotency of the Lord. So there's this constant competition. So once, the Lord says, the Lord knows, the omniscient nature of the Lord knows everything about the potency, but by the time the potency has already increased. So an example which I've heard in this context was, supposing, there is a billionaire and he has some investments made in the bank. So when he, for example, he checks his balance now, he will see some amount, like say like 4 billion, or I don't know, 100 billion or something like that. But without him knowing, he would have seen it as 100 billion or something. But at that same moment, the interest adds up, and within the next minute, it becomes 100 billion plus something, right? So it keeps on increasing. So by the time, so this, so again, the businessman, when he checks after a minute, he sees that it has increased, right? The potential, his balance has increased. So similarly, the omniscient nature of the Lord and the omnipotent nature of the Lord, they are actually keeping, they have this competition going on, and they're one-upping each other all the time like that. So it keeps ever expanding like that. So that is discussed in purport of 36. And and then the last few verses, they discuss the greatness of the Supreme Lord. Answers are given to Yad Adhishtanam. Who is the shelter, and yet Param? What does this creation depend on? And we already discussed this point where the Lord is ever expanding. And it's very nicely also discussed in the purport of verse 39, that how the Supreme Lord is the cause of creation, maintenance, and destruction. And then Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu, they actually only work under his jurisdiction. And so, in effect, he is the cause for all these things. That is described in verse 39. And then there are a few more verses, 41 through 45, which again glorify, the Lord. let me just take a few minutes to read at least the translations if we don't have the time for the purport. Karanarnavashayi Vishnu is the first incarnation of the Supreme Lord, and he is the master of eternal time, space, cause, and effects, mind, the elements, the material ego, the modes of nature, the science, the senses, the universal form of the Lord. Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and the sum total of all living beings, both moving and non-moving. So the different, the greatness of the Lord is described. And text 43 through 45. I myself, Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, great generators of living beings like Daksha and Prajapati, yourselves, Narada and Kumaras, heavenly demigods like Indra and Chandra, the leaders of the Bhurloka planets, leaders of the earthly planets, the leaders of the lower planets, the leaders of the Gandharva planets, and so on and so forth, like the beast, birds, etc. In other words, anything and everything which is exceptionally possessed of power, opulence, mental, and perceptual dexterity, strength, forgiveness, beauty, modesty, may appear to be the specific truth and the form of the Lord, but actually they are not so. They are only a fragment of the transcendental potency of the Lord. So this verse actually says that, though all these, creations are done by the Lord, but the Lord is still aloof, from all this material creation. And it is just a fragment, though, the impersonalists, they imagine that these things to be the form of the Lord, but this is nothing but a fragment of the transcendental potency of the Lord. So that is described in verses 43 to 45. And then now Lord Brahma says that, okay, now so far I discussed these, the Purusha avatars of the Lord. Now let me describe to you the Leela avatars of the Lord, because the Leela avatars, like it said in this translation, hearing of their activities counteracts all foul matters accumulated in the ear. These pastimes are pleasing to hear and are to be relished. Therefore, they are in my heart. So, with this concluding verse, Brahma actually, he says that now let me try to describe the Leela avatars of the Lord. So, he concludes this, this question of creation, which Narada had in these 2 chapters. So I'd like to actually pause here, and I'm sorry I rushed through a few portions. There are so many nice details, but when you find time, please go through the purports and read more in details. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And if, like I said, none of this is realized knowledge. I've just taken, copy pasted from Subodhini and listened to lectures by senior devotees. So so please feel free to correct me if I made any mistakes. And thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you so much for this very beautiful, exhaustive presentation covering all the points from the verses, the purports, and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries to make things more clear, and using the aid of Subodhini. You explained it in a beautiful flow, covering all the important points. So thank you so much for this wonderful effort, Mataji. Very nice. Mataji, I just had one question when you were talking about the different conceptions that is derived from the universal form. So one is, we consider that the universal form is like the different lokas, the lower planetary, middle, and upper. And then we also spoke about the conception of the varnas. But even that, these things, when we talk about the varnas, is it really a meditate? Is it really a visualization? Meaning, like what, a meditative visualization? Because the Virat Rupa, in terms of universal form, meaning the structure of the universe, is seen by the yogi. But when we talk about the Lord's body in terms of the different varnas, it is only a concept. It's not really a meditation of a yogi, correct?
Yeah, this is, like I said, different philosophers, they tend to understand, the Lord in different ways. So that's what it's actually described in verse 37. The Brahmanas represent his mouth, the Kshatriyas. So this is a different conception of a different set of philosophers.
So that these philosophers, when they see the Varna and Ashrama, they connect that to the Lord, right? It's not like meditation or something.
Yeah, this is another philosophical way how they look at it.
Uh-huh.
Because, you know, all these living entities, right? They are parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. So how they do it is, you know, they look at, you know, all these living entities being the different parts of the Supreme Lord. Like, you know, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras. So, you know, when they are trying to discuss the different living entities, they imagine them to be like the head, arms, legs, like that different part of the Supreme Lord.
Got it, Mataji. Thank you so much, Mataji. Very nice.
Yeah, I'm sorry if my explanation is inadequate, but like I'm just speaking what's there. I don't know anything else. Like I said, it's very technical and
Perfect, Mataji. Very nice.
yeah, it started at 7:20 Samsung. I don't know who Samsung is. It started at 7:20.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Very, very beautiful class, Mataji. Thank you so much. Actually, there are chat messages from one Mataji who is me private chat messages. Mataji, these classes that you are joined for the first time, thank you so much for joining in. We have this class every Sunday for you. Is that Sunday or Monday?
Monday.
In India also Monday, right, Mataji? Yeah.
India Tuesday, no? India Tuesday morning, right?
India Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
for us Monday evening. But every day Bhagavatam class also we have. So if you join our regular group, I have sent you the link. You please join that group. You'll find all the classes. And for these classes, I will send you another group link where we will send the PPT out. So you have a notes, and a link also for the YouTube class will be sent there. So you can refer to it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for your feedback that you like the class. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Mataji. Anyone else has any questions, comments, or realizations from this chapter?
I know it's a little technical, right? And it's a lot to take in. So I don't know if I did justice. So I'm sorry if, you know, I confused you all the more. So
It was very interesting and it was very clear. We didn't have any confusion, Mataji. It was very nice.
you'll say that. Preeti already knows so much of stuff, so everything is clear to her.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, comments, or realizations, we'll end here and we stay tuned for our next chapter, next two chapters next week. That will be at the same time. I don't know what the India time would be, but
6:50 a.m. Tuesday.
So that would be India time, and depending on Central, Eastern, or Pacific, you can look it up on the posters, whichever time zone you are located in, to get the times. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Sukha Sagari Mataji, again for the presentation. Very, very nice, Mataji. Thank you for all the effort that you have put in. We can end the call here. Vancha kalpata rubhesha.
Ananta Koti Prabhupada ki jai. Sukha Sagari Mataji ki jai. Thank you, everyone. We'll meet next Monday.